This is the first in what we're going to call a group of podcasts, the Baby Safe Haven podcasts. And we've actually got a few more planned after this. But the first one is really actually a quite simple one. It's one that I get asked a lot when it comes to why we here in Massachusetts are so successful at promoting a baby safe haven law. And it's really actually incredibly simple. You break it down into the smallest of portions. You look at it from very specific points of view. You plan a strategy, almost the same as, maybe not if you're getting elected. Well, some of the ways it's that way. But you go after your constituency, and you go after the very people that you have to get your message to. And in order to do that, you have to break everything down into specific jobs of what you're going to do. So one of the things I get asked is, what is the very first job of a safe haven advocate? And I can tell you very simply exactly what the very first job is of a baby safe haven advocate. But in order to tell you that, you first have to look at what the definitions are, first of the people that are going to receive the information. That's really the key. You never look at everything from the advocacy point of view. You always look at everything from the point of view of who's receiving the information and why they're getting that information and how they're getting that information and what's important about it for them and how exactly you're going to work with them. So the very first thing you have to do is look at the recipient. And the recipient breakdown is very, very easy to do. You first have to look at it from the age groups, and then that's your demographic. Then you have to look at, and if you look at demographic marketing, you look at first ages. A lot of marketing is done by age and the income levels. Then there may be specific things of backgrounds. You may have gender. You may have something like their income levels, where they live in particular portions of the country, or even where they live in specific cities or towns. In a city area, they may be of specific races, they may be of specific backgrounds, they may come from other countries, they may do this, they may do that. But generally, the one thing we look at first is the age group. And the age group for Baby Safe Haven receiving of materials and information is really a quite easy one, because you've got to get your information to people in the age group that's 14. You may look down to the 12 and a half, 13-year-olds, but the real age group is about 14 to 18 years old. And we look at that age group very specifically because it's actually one of the easier ones to get the information to. They're very receptive to the information. They're looking for things to look at from their perspective at that age group. And we know from working with the safe haven laws, from the hotlines, and if we really look into a lot of the stories you see in the media, in TV, and in the newspapers, and whatever media has news for you, there really are two age groups that you have to worry about. That's 18 to 20, just out of high school, 22 to 24, just out of college, maybe going into grad school, 18 to 20, maybe going into college. They may be going out on their own sometime around there. But those are sort of the two, we kind of call them hot areas or red areas within the demographic areas. So in order to make your law work, the best way is to get to 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds with your messaging, and then say, okay, we've got to work with them. That doesn't mean that people above 18 are going to hear what we're saying, because if you go on, say, a radio station that's, top 40, hip-hop, something of that genre, that mainly, or even, hard rock, alternative rock, you may get a bunch of teenagers listening to it, but you're going to have, 22 to 24-year-olds, 13 to 18, and then maybe 19 to 25, 26-year-olds also listening to it. So even though you're kind of aiming your message at those 14 to 18-year-olds, there's overlap all over the place. You can't target a specific age group of 14 to 18 and think that's going to work. You got to go through 5, 6, 7, 10 plus years on either side, although you won't go down into 6 and 7-year-olds, although they do listen to top 40 music and things of that nature. So you want to generally aim at that 14 to 18-year-old age group. They're the recipient. Now let's look at the definition of safe haven law advocates. This is the one that's the toughest definition for most of this, because safe haven law advocates average in age from 50 to about 75. We did a demographic study of the people who are currently out there promoting safe haven laws in the public, in the media. They're doing, TV, radio, newspapers. What they see is what they're trying to get the information out. And the average age is between 63 and 65. So look at the two age groups we're looking at. We're looking at about 13 or 14. We'll just say 14 to 25. And then we're looking at 65. And they range from 50 to 75, or even a little older than 75 in some cases. So there is a 50-year age gap, give or take a little bit. But it's about 50 between the people who are trying to give the message and the people who are trying to receive the message. So then let's go back to the initial question. What's the very first job of somebody that considers themselves a safe haven advocate? And that job is really simple. Your job, if you're going to take on safe haven advocacy, is to go out and find 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 21, 22, 23, about 24-year-olds and have them do the messaging. The worst thing in the world you can do as a 65-year-old is to try to do the messaging yourself. And there's all the demographic background. It's all out there. Everything would tell you to never try that because you're going to fail. The term there that really has to be looked at is influencers. Just look it up. And 14 to 18-year-olds right now fall into a demographic known as Gen Z or Generation Z. All you have to do is Google Gen Z statistics, and you're going to come up with the statistics. They've done so much research on it because marketing people are spending $1 billion to try to influence Gen Z right now. They've done the research for you. You don't have to look at anything else. Look at what MTV does on the air. They're trying to influence Gen Z, so watch what they do. They don't have 65-year-olds doing commercials. They would never have 65-year-olds unless it's a joke. They bring out the Golden Girls and do a comedy skit for, a 30-second TV commercial. That's how they'd market. You'd be a comedy. You're looked at as a comedy sketch if you try to do the marketing to Gen Z. Gen Z is the most famous one right now is Greta Thunberg, who's doing the climate change information. She is the most influential teen right now in the world. That's who you should be looking for. Your version of her. Not the same sentences, not the same words, maybe not exactly the same look. You can have someone that's, maybe more American pop star looking, or maybe somebody that's more of a hip hop star looking, or you can have a young woman who is, I would love to get a potential young woman or young woman who wants to go and be a TV meteorologist in the future, and I'll tell you why later, or maybe in another one of these blogs. But you're looking for those influencers. That's your number one job. Because as a 50-year-old, and most likely if you want to be a baby safe haven advocate or a safe haven law advocate, the likelihood of you being something in a 15-year-old range, if you're 15 or 16, you go out and do the influencing. But almost everybody listening to this podcast, on the average, I'm going to guess is at least 35, probably more than 35, most likely way more than 35. So you're not an influencer. Don't ever think of yourself as an influencer. You have to get influencers. And then when you get those influencers, it's not your job to put the words in their mouth. Remember, they're talking to Gen Z. Your main focus right now is Generation Z. They're going to be the ones who are either going to use or not use a baby safe haven law for the next 10 years. So your job is to play the numbers. Remember the movie Moneyball, one of my favorite movies, now been on TV a few times, that's where I see it. And they played the odds. Everything was playing the odds. If a pitch comes to you that's low and inside, you lay off of it. Your best place is high and inside, or medium inside, or low and outside. That's where your hitting range is. That's where you hit the ball the farthest. That's where you hit it the most. So you're going to do the exact same thing as a baby safe haven advocate or as a safe haven law advocate. You're going to play Moneyball. And the way you play Moneyball is You go for the most runs you can possibly get. You try to get the most men on base. You try to get as many hits as you can. If you can walk, you get a walk. You just try to keep the train moving, as they said in the Boston Red Sox years ago when they played Moneyball. It's just you get the train moving and you just ride that train around the bases and score as many runs as you possibly can. That's what we have to do as Safe Haven Law advocates. We've got to use every single percentage we possibly can. So if you're 75 years old, the chance of you being an influencer with Gen Z is less than 2%, way less than 2%. If you have a 15-year-old, the possibility of them being a real influencer is maybe about 25 to 35%. So they're 20 to 30 points ahead of you right from the very beginning. When you get somebody in the Greta Thunberg range, now you're looking at 35 to 50% influence on that generation. So you want to play with that generation the way they want to see Moneyball played with them. You want to get the information to them, the exact same strategy. You don't use strategies. Like one of the Safe Haven Law advocates, and this is an exact quote, "We want everyone to promote safe haven laws." Now that is one of the worst possible lines you could ever put out there, because everyone means 14 to 18-year-olds. The only ones who are either going to use or not use safe haven laws in the next 10 years are now 14 to 18-year-olds. And I remember hearing there was a newborn abandonment, deadly or not, it's irrelevant at this point, but the woman was about 42. And when we came out and said, look, you've got to start working with teens, this advocate came out and said, well, we want to work with the women that are over 40. We see some women over 40-year-olds potentially not using or maybe needing the information. Now, the possibility of a 40-year-old abandoning a newborn or potentially calling a hotline and using it is very, very small. And then remember this, the safe haven laws have been between 15 and 20 years old. So if this woman was about 40 to 42, that means when the laws passed, she was 20 to 22 or 25 to 27, depending on what state she was in. So for 15 years, that advocate says, oh, we got to aim at women a little older. They completely missed this woman. For 15 to 20 years, they had to work with her, and they lost. And I can tell you right now here in Massachusetts, closing out this 10-year period, this decade, we're down over 95%. The numbers of actual newborn abandonments that were confirmed, not stories that were stillbirths that were at first thought to be abandonments, or there was a baby found in, Stamford, Connecticut. There was a story that 3 different recycling plants from here in New England and New York bring their trash, that this baby was found in a recycling trash facility down in Stamford, Connecticut. Sometimes they come from North Andover in Massachusetts, but no trucks had gone down there for about 3 or 4 weeks, so there's no way it came from here in Massachusetts, and they also serve southern New Hampshire, so we know that. But people will point to us, oh, no, you had one in... No, absolutely not. We do the detective work. And we've had several instances like that. We had a baby that at first was reported that it was found someplace in a parking lot right outside the door of actually the woman was found in the baby, and they didn't put them information that the woman was found with the baby. The first thing came out was the baby was found. That TV stations and newspapers sometimes get the wrong information at first, but everybody acts properly. So what you have to do is work with your influencers. Let's get back to that. And if you're going to miss this huge percent of young people by saying, we want everyone to help us promote the safe haven law, it's a huge statistical mistake. Play the statistical averages so they favor you. Don't bet against the house when the odds are 25 to 45 to 1 against you. Because if you put a 65 or 75-year-old out there, you're going to get a 1 or 2%. It's a 50 to 1 chance you're ever going to get information into the people you need to get it to. The other thing that happens is when you put everyone out there, it's really disastrous. And this has been confirmed many, many, many times over through direct marketing to teens for literally 50, 60 years. If you have exclusively 45, 55, 65, 75-year-olds attempting to market to teens on a commercial level, those businesses fail. more than you would ever think possible. They fail at such high numbers, it's not even funny. And the same thing is now, especially with the internet age and the social media age. Places that try to market as old school, 50 to 70-year-olds trying to market the products to teens, they lose their shirts. They go out of business so fast. So why are we doing that with safe haven laws? We want to be successful. So we should be copying what Madison Avenue tells us and what the high-tech marketers in Southern California tell us to work towards Gen Z. They're doing the marketing towards them. You do what's best. And if you're out there as a 65-year-old, the first thing that happens, the very first thing that happens with Gen Z is they walk away from you. And you have no possibility after that to market towards them. They're staying away from you. They avoid you like the plague and worse. They don't care what you say. Because statistically, Gen Z doesn't like older people. They distrust them at a much higher percentage than any generation previous to them in history. So why the heck are we trying to market towards them with 65-year-olds? They're going to walk away, and when they walk away, they do what they're supposed to do. They do what their generation would tell them to do. They stay away from that issue. They see it as ownership. You own the issue. You're over 65. We want nothing to do with you. We'll work on the issues that are good for us, that we know we can do, that we won't have your interference. You're going to come in and you're going to interfere with us if we start to do safe haven law promotion and safe haven law awareness advocacy. They know the older advocates are going to come after them. They know they're going to jump in front of them and try to take away any media that they're doing. They know they're going to get bullied. I mean, literally get bullied away from it by these older advocates. So they're just not going to bother with it. And they'll stay away for 10 years. And in that 10-year period, what's happened? What's happened is what we're seeing outside in Massachusetts and New England. We're seeing deadly newborn abandonments over and over and over again, and abandonments where the baby's barely found alive in New York, Illinois, Indiana, California, Florida, Texas. In all those states, Arizona, I can go on and on. There's so many of them. All those states that have these okay boomer, and that's the term Gen Z will use towards you, they have the okay boomers attempting to do all the promotion. You do that 100% of the time, you're going to get 0.001% influence over the people you have. So here's the definition or the answer to the question. What is the first job of a safe haven advocate or a so-called advocate, somebody that identifies themselves as an advocate? Your job, number one, is to go out and find young people to promote the law to themselves. Your second job is then to help them do it, but do it in their own voices. You don't tell them as, well, you have to go around saying you're saving babies. We'll get into that later. Worst two words you could ever use for Gen Z. But you let them do the information. You can copy what we're doing here in New England. We have the protocols all set up. Just watch the videos. And they'll copy us. They're not going to copy you if they see them. They see what our Gen Z people are doing, they're going to copy exactly what we're doing. They're not going to listen to you. They're going to walk away from you. And then they're going to walk away from the advocacy. So why don't you just do what's best on it that way? And you can find these young people. The best people to use are performers. They like to perform. They sort of have that performing gene, G-E-N-E, as I say. And they like to go out there and perform. And they can be, musicians, guitar players, bands, people in bands, hip-hop artists, those types of people. I'd even say professional dancers would be great. I wouldn't want to get an aspiring politician. Just they're probably not looked at as well. I mean, they can have advocacies on different issues and then do this one and also on the side if they want. That's who you're looking for. And the number one thing they have to be is they have to attract the attention of Gen Z. Greta Thunberg is attractive to that Gen Z, just to use her name. So that's what you want to get. You have to attract their attention first. And if you think a 65-year-old face and voice is going to attract their attention, forget it. Less than 0.001% possibility of you attracting their attention. And you want to get their attention attracted. You want to catch their attention. You want them to see you as something that they'll gravitate towards and listen to. And they want to see Gen Z doing this, or maybe somebody that's just a little older, like 23, 24, but is popular amongst that, teen culture. Don't try to do it yourself. So again, what's the first job of a safe haven advocate? Your job is to go out and find Gen Zs and bring them in and start working with them and get them to do everything. And don't jump in front of them and say, I'm going to give a speech and then I'll have you say a few words. Nope. You get way behind them. You be complete support cast. You don't do any interviewing. You don't do any talking. And then say, okay, now here's this person to say a few words, and then try to jump back in front of them again and finish up a press conference. They do everything 100% of the time, because the minute they'll walk away if you don't. That's the first thing. They won't work with you. They'll walk away. You'll get maybe a few seconds of work out of them, and then they're gone. So we'll wrap this up. What's the first job of a safe haven advocate? Get 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds. They're the ones who are going to be your advocates, your spokespeople, and you're going to become a manager for them. It's really that simple. So that's the podcast. I went a lot longer than I thought I would, watching the timer go by. We're going to do another one. What's the worst phrase that you can use in safe haven law advocacy? There's a 2-word phrase out there. There's a thing that the older people in my generation say, okay, boomer. When somebody in Gen Z says it to us, it's akin to that person calling us the N-word. That's what came out of a boomer in my generation. I actually think it's stronger and worse than that. Not in the same way. It doesn't have the connotations, but it's an insult in the worst possible way. There's actually 2 words that are used so many times by older safe haven advocates. It's the worst possible 2-word phrase you can use. And I'm going to think of a way to describe it other than the way I just said, because it isn't really that appropriate and isn't that good a parallel. But I'll come up with that. That's going to be our next podcast. So stick around. We'll put this one up. We want as many comments as you can give us underneath. If you don't agree with me, fine. That's okay. Remember, I'm here in Massachusetts, and I've got the lowest number of newborn abandonments in U.S. history right here in our state. We have the highest levels of education in the schools. When they say we're going to teach in the schools, we're the ones that are doing that in Massachusetts. Your state, you think you're going to go in there as a boomer and teach in the schools? Nuh-uh, not going to work that way. You have it from the bottom up. You get the young people so informed that the schools catch up with you. That's what happened in Massachusetts. So that's what we're going to work on next. Get ready for it. Like and comment underneath, and we'll talk to you next time.